You're listening to Civic from the San Francisco Public Press. On this edition, we'll hear from avid beach cleaners about what kinds of trash volunteers have been collecting from shorelines, and we'll learn about well-intentioned alternatives that unfortunately aren't real solutions.
As great as it is to want to come up with real solutions to the single-use plastic problem, we have to avoid pitfalls or what we call false solutions. And currently, bioplastics are, unfortunately, what we would designate as a false solution. On top of how they react in the environment, they're actually toxic.
I'm Laura Wennis, and this is Civic. You probably already know that plastic pollution is a major and persistent problem. A report on the waste picked up by cleanup crews with the Surfrider Foundation bears that out. This is a nonprofit grassroots organization dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's ocean, waves, and beaches. The vast majority of what volunteers collected from beaches and seashores in 2020 was plastic. Bottles, to-go containers, broken off pieces of bigger items, you name it. But this report goes beyond just emphasizing that this is a problem. It looks back on how beach cleanups worked during the pandemic and what new waste items started appearing during COVID times. It also explains why one alternative approach, bioplastics, doesn't really cut it. I got into the details with Rachel Coccia, plastic pollution coordinator at the Surfrider Foundation, and Holden Hardcastle, the chair of Surfrider's San Francisco chapter. Let's start by talking about the pandemic, because that is a major thing to consider. As I understand it, in 2020, nearly 9,000 actually, Surfrider volunteers held almost 1,000 beach cleanups and removed more than 80,000 pounds of trash and recycling from beaches, neighborhoods, and waterways. That's not to say the pandemic had no impact on volunteer numbers and cleanup strategy. Can you both talk a bit about how those efforts had to adapt to pandemic lockdowns and restrictions?
Yes, sure. I can go first. Sure. Kind of from a national standpoint, this certainly became a whole new challenge area for us. In the past, I think Surfrider is known for our iconic sort of big group cleanups and having tons of volunteers gather together on our beaches and being able to provide some of that information and the equipment for volunteers so they can kind of just show up ready to go. But obviously, we couldn't have a lot of group gatherings during the pandemic. So that was really the first area that created some challenge for us. And to adapt to that, we started encouraging what we called solo cleanups. So this is having an individual or their immediate family get together. We provided our online data card that could be downloaded. And then you just simply go out, whether it's your neighborhood or a local park, or if you have access to a beach, to start just collecting that data so we didn't have a huge gap in our findings. So that was actually extremely successful. We began to collect a lot of data in regions that we hadn't really known what was going on there before. And we were cued into this new emerging form of plastic pollution, which is the personal protective equipment. Mainly, we're talking single-use masks and gloves. So that, having volunteers still out there was so crucial, because otherwise it could have been a long time before we realized the impact that PPE was having on our environment and in such a short time span.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about this data card that you're talking about? What is that, and how did volunteers use it?
Sure. So our data card is, again, it's available on our beach cleanup website, so anybody can access it, download it, and take it with them when they go to do a cleanup. So basically, it just provides a template for all of the information that we like to collect, including, the duration of your cleanup, how many volunteers were there, how many pounds you collected, and then it goes down into itemized data. So this could be counting the number of single-use gloves or the number of plastic bags. And, the list goes on, but we've really created a pretty comprehensive data set of these itemized results, which is actually really important because it allows us to inform policy decisions about what we should be looking to ban and where we need to find alternatives. So this data and getting these itemized results is really, really important for the overall program.
Yeah, Holden, did you want to add to that? Do you have any thoughts about how these cleanups had to adapt to the pandemic?
Everything's been kind of hit right on the head there, where we were seeing, in San Francisco, we would have cleanups, 300 people showing up, and we'd have a line around the block, and we're just stretching down the beach. And then the next day it was, okay, we can't get together and we don't know how this thing is being spread. So we don't want to be a super spreader event. And so we had to like really back off. So we actually took like a backseat for a long time and trying to figure out what we were going to do. But then having the individual cleanups, having the waivers go digital, having the digital
waivers.
So we would have waivers. Sorry. So we used to bring waivers to everything, and so it was like, and it was always a big deal. It's like, oh, we need our like 300 beach cleanup waivers, so we're going to Kinko's every weekend or every week, and it's like just running stuff off, and then someone had to go through and enter all that information in. It just created this huge backlog. But what HQ did is provided us with a digital waiver, and it was like. But during the pandemic, having people go out on their own and do it was great, and it forced us to look at how do we want to do beach cleanups in the future, because again, like hauling out buckets in mass scale, like I said, we were getting 300 people, so 300 5-gallon buckets are not easy to take out there. So we rethought that process during this time, and we've now been able to get it down to say 30 or 40 buckets, which is still cumbersome, but it's much easier than 300 buckets, and people are really excited to bring their own stuff because we have one less point of contact with one another, but we're still able to go out there as a group and clean up the beaches and keep our waterways clean.
One thing I'm curious about is what you do or what volunteers do with the waste that they collect when they're doing these cleanups. I'm guessing most of it is trash, but if there are recyclables, do you sort those out? Where are they instructed to bring them, etc.?
From our perspective at this point, we used to do a lot of sorting, and we still do that. We still count and track everything as much as we can. And so right now what we're doing is everything is going into trash bags, but they are then collected by our National Park Services, and then that gets sent to Recology, who, to the best of my knowledge, is sorting everything appropriately. And while that may not be the case 100% of the time, I figure it's better in a trash bag than on the beaches.
Rachel, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it really varies depending on the chapter and the region and what's available to them. But in most cases, we certainly do encourage that sorting process, which is hopefully taking place when volunteers are, counting the results and getting all of that data. And so it should be pretty easy to then separate the recyclables from the trash. And yes, I think vast majority ends up being trash, unfortunately. But for where there are opportunities to recycle or reuse materials, we have seen some chapters get creative by, either using it for art supplies or donating it to a local artist as well. The cigarette surfboard comes to mind actually as this great team of two young men who designed these surfboards out of used and discarded cigarette butts.
Wow.
So there are some creative solutions out there, and it really, I think it's kind of a fun local opportunity for our chapters to try and engage with those in the community that may have a use for these items.
Yeah. The most common type of item, as I understand it, picked up by Surfrider was actually plastic fragments. So plastic is an issue and we know this, but I found it interesting that so much of this was plastic bits. And that could come from a lot of different things. What were some of the most commonly collected items other than plastic fragments, and how prevalent in those was plastic?
Sure, I can talk first, I guess, just national snapshot, and then we can hone in on the San Francisco area. But yeah, you got it right. It's really plastic. And those plastic fragments are interesting because they could be coming from so many different sources, and it's so hard to tell what that original, whether it was a big piece of plastic that broke down and became these smaller fragments, or if they were manufactured and produced to be that small because they are pre-production pellets and they were going to be, essentially turned into a product that you might see in the market that's made of plastic. But other than that, so much of what we found does go back to foodware. It does kind of point to the single-use plastic that, again, became much more prevalent during the pandemic was takeout. And, a lot of us stopped going and we couldn't, because of the restrictions, sit down and enjoy a meal at a restaurant with, reusables on-site dining. So a lot of restaurants started ramping up their takeout services, and that means a lot more single use. And unfortunately, it also, in this day and age, it means with plastic. We're starting to see some alternatives for takeout that might be paper or fiber-based, but plastic still does remain the most affordable and just the most common. So that is definitely reflected in our findings. We saw food wrappers and straws and bottles and the bottle caps actually exceedingly becoming more and more prevalent. And what's kind of an interesting opportunity from these findings is the fact that we have a kind of complementary program called Ocean Friendly Restaurants. And the whole aim of that program is to keep single-use plastic out of the restaurant space, especially for customers. And there's two reasons for that. One is obviously the fact that these are just ending up as pollution, but also that plastic can be really toxic for people. And especially if you're consuming hot items out of a plastic container, you can be pretty sure that some of those chemicals are leaching into the food or the beverage that you're consuming. So I think what I love about the cleanup program is that it gives us all of this information that we can then use to come up with creative solutions and ways to work around it. And I think, the opportunities really are kind of endless.
Mm-hmm. Holden, did that same trend of like majority of the items cleaned up being made in whole or in part from plastic, did that hold up locally as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, we saw, especially when the pandemic first kicked off, or when we went back out there at scale in the last couple of months, we have seen like people are asking, oh, where can I clean up? It's like, look around you. We haven't been out here at scale for 18 months, so you can pick up pretty much anywhere. And it's a lot of like food waste, like, the single-use plastics from to-go containers. And we've had one of our big focuses as a chapter is to push our volunteers and even the public to, San Francisco's making a big effort to get out there with your reusables and patron places, and especially like the coffee. I don't know, San Francisco is a big coffee town, and so get out there with your reusable coffee mugs, and then patron the places that are accepting those currently, and then even the places that aren't, let them know that this is what you want to be using. But then there's even people that have and companies that have stepped it up. I think it's where they're now providing reusables, where we've done some partnerships with Square Guy Pizza locally, and they will deliver a pizza to you in a metal tray, and then to encourage you to order from them again, they'll actually come and pick it up and then drop off another tray. So you're not having the cardboard packaging that comes in most pizza places. So
could you both talk a little bit about what the effects of this plastic pollution on beaches is? I think everybody kind of knows that plastic is a problem because it doesn't break down, and because it produces microplastics, and because so much of the pollution in the ocean is plastic. But what harm is plastic doing when it's just bits of it on a beach?
And to kind of just give that big picture image of how much of this really is plastic. When we looked at our national results, it was 88% of all the items that we collected were plastic. So once it's on the beach and once it's sort of become embedded in that ecosystem, I think the first concern that we have is for wildlife. And this is because a lot of animals are mistaking, especially those small bits of plastic, for food. And one of the reasons why is because their natural food sources are becoming more rare, which is another human-caused issue to think about. But just considering the impact that the pollution can have on wildlife, ingestion does become a major concern. Obviously, there's no nutrition in plastic. So even if the animal can eat a small enough piece to pass it through, they're not getting any benefit out of that. And a lot of times it can actually get caught up in the digestive tract, causing the animal to starve. So wildlife impacts, I think, are really top of mind when we think about, what's the damage it's doing just sitting there. And, sea turtles are another example that come up on the beach to lay their eggs. And so those small turtles are being, immediately exposed to this really toxic material. Another concern is the fact that the more plastic we start to see on our beaches and the more embedded it becomes in that ecosystem, the harder it's going to be to get rid of it. So once it's there in the form of a microplastic, which are these really small fragments, it's going to be extremely difficult. And some of our chapters actually will go out, and I'm not too sure, Holden, you have to let me know if you guys have tried to do any of this microplastic collection, but you have to go out with screens, with very small openings, and it's tedious work. And it's so that does become a growing concern. The more we see accumulating, we know that the harder it's going to be to eventually, clean it all up, which is really the reason why Surfrider tackles a source reduction first action plan, because we need to turn off that tap, get the plastic to stop coming before we can really think about what to do with those pieces that are just so prevalent in the environment today.
Yeah, I can hardly imagine going out and like sifting a beach for microplastics. Holden, did you want to jump in with the local perspective here?
That all sounds exactly right. That's everything that we're experiencing here, where you'll see wildlife wash up on shore, and then and they're eating the sand and all the wildlife that lives just inches below what we normally don't see, and they're consuming all of that. And so, I've got a 3-year-old daughter who you can't hear anymore, but she is, she's constantly digging in it, and it's like she'll pull up like a piece of plastic, and it's like, oh, what is this? This must be something great. And you're like, oh, actually, this is an old bag, or this is something like this is just plastic, and she's playing with it. And so seeing that is just, it's like, well, what else is underneath there? And it's really difficult because we get so, like, the way that the San Francisco beaches work is we get so much that washes up. We're just trying to keep the top layer clean. And we don't even, like, right now, we don't have the bandwidth to like do the sifting of, say, 7 miles of windy beach to like get all the nurdles and small microplastics out that are like just below the surface. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. I'm speaking with Rachel Coccia and Holden Hardcastle with the Surfrider Foundation about plastic pollution on beaches and what can be done about it. One area of focus in the Surfrider report that I want to talk about is bioplastics and how they behave when they're no longer in use. Because I think that, especially here, you see a lot of these if you go out to eat. You see a lot of things with a little green leaf that implies, like, well, this is better than plastic. What are bioplastics, and why should we be thinking about them?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So, as we talked about, this single-use foodware is becoming an increasingly bigger and bigger problem when we look at the plastic pollution issue. So, I think the plastic problem is a lot more widespread than just pollution. I mean, we are hearing more and more about the impacts that it has with the production phase, the environmental justice issues of polluting surrounding communities. And of course, people want to come up with a better solution. And so bioplastics were one of these areas that tried to take this whole system approach of, let's get out of our traditional single-use plastic mindset and still keep the single use. We want to keep that convenience for people, but we want to try and come up with a material that does less damage. So in the big scheme of things, a great solution-oriented approach. However, the issue comes in when we actually take a look at the marketing of these materials and the research of what actually happens when these items get in the environment, despite whatever claims the marketing is saying will take place. So I think the most common bioplastics that we use or we come in contact with if you go out to eat would be PLA. And this is a plant-based plastic. It's really difficult to talk about this in a way that is all-encompassing because there hasn't been a lot of regulation around the marketing of these products. So you could have a PLA cup that's, 5% plant-based and 95% petroleum, and they
Oh, no.
Exactly. So we're finding a lot of these mixtures in bioplastics that aren't entirely plant-based. But even in the products that are, completely made from something like corn or sugarcane or, even like avocado, we're starting to see some avocado seed products. Even in those, when they've tested them in the environment, in an environment simulated over time, they don't break down at the rates that a lot of them claim to break down. And in most cases, you actually need to send them to a specialized facility, which has the ability to break these specific molecules apart that we find in bioplastics. And these facilities are few and far in between. They require a lot of high pressure, high temperature environments. So let's say as a normal consumer, you go and you get your coffee, your iced coffee, and it comes in a PLA cup, and you know it because it's got the green leaf or it says something like plant-based. When you're done with that, the average person would probably throw it out. In most cases, you have the option of either recycling it or putting it in the trash. There's not a lot of public education or the infrastructure for us to know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. So if you put it in the trash, it's going to the landfill, it's going in the environment, or it's going to an incinerator where it produces just as much greenhouse gases as petroleum plastic.
Great.
If it gets into a recycling, it's even worse scenario, because then it's jamming up a recycling plant that doesn't have the ability to handle these materials, ruining entire batches of otherwise recyclable material, and then kind of ending up back in that same landfill environment incinerator scenario.
Great.
So as great as it is to want to come up with real solutions to the single-use plastic problem, we have to avoid pitfalls or what we call false solutions. And currently bioplastics are, unfortunately, what we would designate as a false solution. On top of how they react in the environment, they're actually toxic. So a new study just released the toxicity of bioplastics being just as dangerous and harmful to a person as petroleum. So, unfortunately, we can't recommend these products. They usually come at a higher price point. So a lot of times we find restaurants are spending more money because they think they're making a sustainable choice. And at the end of the day, it's just simply, we're not there yet.
Yikes. Holden, we have a curbside composting program in San Francisco, which is fairly rare. Mm-hmm. Does that make a difference in how the waste that's collected gets sorted out? Does that make bioplastics any more sustainable in San Francisco than elsewhere?
I don't think so, just because of everything that Rachel talked about, where it's just like this stuff isn't breaking down. And so we don't want to discourage people from trying new things and doing like every little step helps forward, right? Like, are bioplastics great? No, but is it better than, say, a single-use piece of plastic? In my mind, yes. Like, it's a step forward. It's not the end goal, and so we just consider at every turn. We try to get people to, like, here's a reusable. Like, take this. Like, take a coffee cup. Take a stainless steel thing, or take a piece of take a glass cup. In fact, I was out traveling with my family, and one of the bartenders was like, "Oh, like we just asked for a glass of water," and she's like, "Oh, well, we have water over there, and there's plastic cups. Like, do you have a glass one?" And I got the eye roll. I was like, "Well, okay, like I see that you have the greenware, but what I'm really interested in is a piece of plastic or is a glass cup because I don't want to have the other, like, yeah, I don't want to be doing a single use anything." And maybe that's like the position is, I don't want to single use anything. I want something that can be used more than once. So, but to go back to the composting, I think composting is always good. I don't think the greenware or the plant plastics or the bioplastics, yeah, because it's still confusing. It's like, well, I don't know where to put this. Is this plastic or is this compost?
Yeah. I'm interested in what you just said about someone rolling their eyes at you for asking for a reusable piece of, dishware or whatever. What's up with that, and what do we do about that? What does Surfrider do to combat this kind of, oh yeah, there go the environmentalists again kind of attitude? Do you encounter that a lot, and how do you respond?
I don't know that I encounter it a lot, but I'd say it's like 50-50. So maybe it is a lot. I think in San Francisco proper, it's pretty common and people understand. It's more when I say get outside of the Bay Area, and I think just like anything that, I don't want to say that this is like on the forefront, but when you're trying to like change a system, and it's a system that for a lot of people they don't have control over, because if you're, say, a bartender, it's like, well, this is just what I have,
right?
And so when I'm going in there, it's like, hey, I've got my hipster coffee cup, and I just want I just want a glass, and they see that it's for my 3-year-old, and they're like, oh, this is going to be a mess. Like, it's a whole thing. But is that little bit of spilled water better than, a single-use piece of plastic on scale? Absolutely. From a father's perspective, it's actually better to have my daughter drinking out of a piece of glass, because then she like learns the weight of it and all that, like that whole skill set. Right. But I think just continuing to push for it, because it is something that is important to myself, then it's like, well, you can roll your eyes, but this is better for everyone in the long run.
Rachel, what about you? What are your thoughts about, what this report really, what people should take away from these cleanup efforts and from this report, and how important it is to, reduce pollution of beaches, especially with plastic?
So what we hope to do with our cleanup report and with a lot of Surfriders' educational and outreach materials is not just to raise awareness, but to call people to action and to show them how it relates to them. We have a lot of things to worry about this day and age, and just, it's hard sometimes to think outside the scope of your day-to-day issues that you might be dealing with just within your family unit. But plastic is one of these problems that really is global. This is a universal issue that connects and relates to every single person that is alive and breathing today. So it's, I think, a way to unify people and to help us recognize that we are animals on the planet that have an impact, but we also have an opportunity to make real improvements. And one of the things we like to do in our cleanup report is not just focus on the problems and the information about what's out there, which is really important, because if we don't understand something, we don't know what to do about it. But we also try to highlight the individuals, the volunteers like Holden and his team in San Francisco that are going out, taking time out of their day because they care so much about this, to do something and make a real impact and pick up the plastic off the beach. So we have a whole section in our cleanup report that is designated to our volunteers and gets a really nice snapshot at the different regions and how different people are handling this issue creatively. And we also, really want people to take home the fact that, yes, this is a big problem, but if every single one of us does something, we can get out of it. We're not at this point of no return. We've seen the impact that policies, once we finally ban something, we no longer find it on our beaches. So we're seeing this ripple effect starting, but we really just need to keep building that momentum, keep increasing positive public perception, and helping the environmental standpoint become, just the standard. Because in my opinion, if you're a human on planet Earth, you're an environmentalist. It's kind of part of the deal.
Yeah, food for thought. Well, Rachel and Holden, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Really appreciate you reaching out, and hope everyone can get out there and read the cleanup report and figure out how they fit into the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much. This has been great.
That was Rachel Coccia, Plastic Pollution Coordinator at the Surfrider Foundation, and Holden Hardcastle, the Chair of Surfrider's San Francisco chapter. I'm Laura Wennes, and you've been listening to Civic. Before I let you go today, at the Public Press, which is Civic's parent organization, we've been working really hard during this pandemic to pursue angles we're not seeing much coverage of elsewhere, or to take a more systemic look at the issues that are surfacing in the headlines. The San Francisco Public Press is a nonprofit, and we're inspired by the public radio model. That's the idea that people who are able to support the work that we do so everyone can have access to it without paywalls or ads. If you think we're onto something, we'd very much appreciate if you could show your support. You can do that by going to sfpublicpress.org/donate, or by helping us get the word out about this show. Subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use, or leave us a review. It really does help, so thank you.